Hello, my name is Brian James Leech. I teach at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, in the United States. I'm Associate Professor of History there. I'm really excited to be presenting today about post-colonial adventures in mining, which is going to cover the portrayal of mine exploration in North American reality television. But first, I'd love to thank the excellent organizers of this conference, Extraction, Tracing the Veins. I'll jump right in. Dense jungles, icy wastelands, frightening indigenous people, and dashing white heroes. One of the most popular kinds of narratives in the 19th century US should probably be labeled colonial mining adventures. Based on European and American reports on the search for mineral wealth, such narratives found their way into fiction by the end of the 19th century, including iconic novels like King Solomon's Mines and The Call of the Wild. These Gilded Age stories proved resonant enough that they have more recently repeated themselves in this post-colonial world. Over the last decade, American reality television has similarly featured stories about Euro-American adventurers seeking gold in exoticized foreign lands. This presentation will explore the connections between these colonial mining narratives. Looking at shows like Alaska's Gold Diggers, Ice Cold Gold, and Jungle Gold, this paper will argue that these mining adventure stories continue to be used to justify extraction in and the exoticization of faraway lands. Indeed, reality television seems to have made these older narratives more palatable to some segments of the modern audience, even as they make more viewers increasingly uncomfortable with the neo-colonialist heritage of mining. The cultural history of extraction remains largely unexplored. If we look broadly at larger discussions of mining in popular culture, we see scholars covering a few themes: community building, greed, violence, class conflict, company power, individualism, and environmentalist critiques. Yet most of these analyses focus on older films, like The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, or on prestige fictional television, like Deadwood. The recent surge of mining stories into American reality television has received little examination, and although a recent analysis by historian Bob Johnson has examined the hyper-reality and hyper-masculinity of these shows, none of these scholarly discussions look at the often troubling post-colonial nature. These shows often hide the uneven consequences of extraction on mining communities, which are now being detailed by political ecologists and other environmental scholars. In America, gold rush stories during the middle of the 19th century often recounted miners' individual success in the face of arid lands and contentious natives. Historian Christopher Herbert explains that the mid-19th century conception of white manliness required itinerant miners to showcase their bravery, emotional control, and self-reliance. Facing great uncertainty in these new lands, white men celebrated their supposed independence, juxtaposing this feature of their lives with the non-white peoples they encounter along the way. Whether done through letters home or newspaper stories back east, mining's triumphalist stories, as literary scholar Janet Floyd calls them, came to emphasize American individualism and white men's triumph over a harsh environment. These themes became especially prominent at the turn of the century. The last rush of North America's Gilded Age happened in the Klondike region of Canada's Yukon, drawing at least 100,000 prospectors, mainly from the U.S., between 1896 and 1899. The San Francisco Call's edition from the 23rd of January, 1898, provides a good example of the kind of rhetoric surrounding the rush north. A large spread titled "Picking Up Millions in Alaska" featured tales from successful Klondike gold hunters. A good example from this publication came from George Clancy, who noted his discouraging trials in the biting cold but still celebrated his luck when he picked up a fortune. D. Barnes played up his triumph over typhoid in a winter unlike anything he'd experienced. One writer discussed his manly desire to penetrate the virgin lands of the Klondike to gain wealth, while another writer claimed to have scratched $10,000 out of the earth with a little stick. One of the wives interviewed believed Alaska and the Yukon a hard country for a woman. Quote, "She would not take responsibility of advising any of my sex to go to the Klondike," end quote. Lessons taught by this public rhetoric were simple. The cold north would be conquered by respectable white men willing to endure its hardships. Jack London's The Call of the Wild is probably the most famous literary representation of the Klondike Gold Rush. In this tale, a dog named Buck is stolen from his idyllic Southern California home and brought to the uncivilized Klondike. Buck becomes the best of the sled dogs. Experiencing the harsh environment leads Buck to become progressively feral. When the Native American Yehots murder his owner, Buck kills several of them in vengeance. Hearing the call of the wild, Buck joins a wolf pack at the end of the short novel, which was originally serialized for the Saturday Evening Post in 1903. Here Jack London presents the trope of a white hero, but in the form of a dog, who learns the ways of the unforgiving environment and then comes to dominate the indigenous dogs, and then peoples. Although Jack London and the letter writers of the San Francisco Call all traveled to the Klondike, the public rhetoric they shared romanticized the triumph of white manliness over the extreme mining environment. In doing so, they of course admit quite a lot. Lost amongst these tales of success were many gold rush letters and journals from men and women who experienced these same hardships only to radically fail, returning home after becoming broke and sometimes broke in. In the same folder at the University of Alaska Fairbanks where I encountered the San Francisco Call sits a letter by Anna J. Rickenbach to her home in California, noting a slow slide that buried her traveling companions and a blizzard that almost killed the rest. Or take Edward C. Sharp's diaries. His first diary recounts an exciting adventure towards fortune in drama and comedy of a trip up the Klondike, which was published in the Seattle Argus in 1897. Sharp's second diary, however, describes a painful, grueling trip back south, absent any wealth, and all while suffering from a tuberculosis that would soon take his life. That diary was, of course, not published. Plus, most of these narratives omit the very real presence of women in Alaska and the Klondike who weren't housewives or prostitutes, including both native women and migrants who worked their own claims. Despite featuring a completely different setting, adventure stories about African mines from the late 19th and early 20th centuries also tend to emphasize individual white male triumph over an extreme exotic environment and the dangerous natives who inhabit it. Europeans operated a number of mines by the 1880s in southern Africa. In 1852, a copper mine in what is now the Northern Cape province became the first European-operated property in the area. Diamond discoveries in the 1860s helped to trigger the first Boer War, while the arrival of thousands of British expatriates due to a gold rush in 1886 increased the political tensions that eventually led to the Second Boer War. H. Rider Haggard spent his younger years in southern Africa. He'd even been present at the official announcement of the British annexation of the Boer Republic of the Transvaal. Back in England, Haggard pieced together his knowledge of African mines with his fascination for Europeans' recent discoveries of supposedly lost civilizations, like Great Zimbabwe. The result was one of the best-selling books of all time, King Solomon's Mines. As literary scholar Heidi Kaufman puts it, Haggard's book, quote, describes the journey of three robust English men who successfully penetrate a sexualized landscape in southern Africa, end quote. After climbing a mountain described as Sheba's breast, the adventurers fool members of the dangerous Kukwana tribe by claiming to be white gods. Then eventually they locate diamonds hidden within a tomb at King Solomon's Mines, only barely escaping with their lives, and a few diamonds. Just as with colonial stories about northern frontiers, African stories pioneered by Haggard create a kind of colonial mining narrative that would be reused many times. King Solomon's Mines itself has been adapted into a film at least 6 times, with versions from both 1950 and 1985 making a good showing at the box office. Haggard's work certainly influenced movies like Indiana Jones series too, like a film such as The Temple of Doom, in which white adventurer Jones uncovers a fantastically rich mine being mined by local children enslaved by a dangerous indigenous cult. The same themes developed by books like King Solomon's Mines and The Call of the Wild have been more recently taken up by American reality television in a neo-colonialist context. They yet again feature supposedly frozen wastelands and steamy jungles. One good example of the genre is Ice Cold Gold, a show that ran for 3 seasons from 2013 to 2015 on the channel Animal Planet. Ice Cold Gold provides a good example of the reality TV genre of tough guy TV, which centers on dangerous working-class jobs and sells them as authentic, despite their common use of very staged, dramatic moments. The heavy-handed narration that begins the first episode of the first season explains that climate change means that ice is melting off of rock that no one has ever seen or mined before. A ragtag team of 8 American miners are joining the international race to grab Greenland's riches. One team member connects their mission to America's colonial history, claiming that, quote, Greenland is the new frontier, just like the old West was in the United States. There's gold, there's diamonds, there's rubies, quote. 2 of the miners, Josh and Jesse Feldman, hail from Arizona and perform all of their interviews wearing cowboy hats, as you can see in the photos here. The narrator makes clear these rough-hewn American men are taking the same kinds of risks as previous adventurers. They've left their jobs back home to endure a race against Mother Nature. The small window of good weather on Greenland provides them with only 2 months to prospect. Yet they won't give up, even though apparently 99% of miners fail to find anything, says the narrator. The narrator also makes clear that even in the summer, this Arctic weather can challenge miners with freezing temps and unforgiving conditions. Their wilderness guide, Jack Duggins, insists that it was a serious place to be, and even the most beautiful places have their own dangers. Show makes a big deal about the lack of paved roads on Greenland, and they even exoticize Greenland's local people. The guide claims that Greenland's inhabitants enjoy a simpler way than Americans, which is precisely why they are able to survive when many Americans wouldn't. Miner Josh Feldman tells viewers that it's just the worst possible conditions. One bad storm could wipe their camp away. Because of the uncooperative weather, the miners cannot get to their claim in the first episodes. Hence, to create some effective visuals, they wander up above the city they've arrived at and pan for gold. After the show creates great suspense over whether heroes will be able to make it down the slippery slope safely, the crew, of course, finds a few tantalizing flecks of gold to prove that they know what they're doing. Yet they're not able to actually mine in that area, since it's not even their claim. The miners pretend that few have been on this island, despite a scene just before their hike that shows them in a well-traveled store as they seek provisions. In a later episode, the ragtag crew has started to fray under the pressure. The 8 men debate over who can out-hike each other and who can find the most gold. His men are trying to prove their own masculinity through these trials. One of the men, John Self, becomes incredibly angry and almost physically fights a couple of the men on the crew. Using gendered language to explain what he does not want to be, Self proclaims that, quote, "I was turning into a little bitch," end quote, and hence cracking under the pressure. He sadly noted that it would be very hard to go home to his daughter empty-handed. Self essentially believes here that his brief lack of self-control made him more feminine and hence less useful as a gold prospector. Indeed, the rejection of femininity and domesticity seems a common feature of these shows. Yes, these men have their families in mind as beneficiaries of their gold prospecting, but they prove their masculinity by being away from their families, by being physical, and by taking risks in their hunt for gold. A good contrast to the masculinity proving ground of Ice Cold Gold is another Animal Planet show, Alaska Gold Diggers. Premise of this show is that 5 women from Newport Beach, California have inherited mines in Fairbanks and Nome, Alaska. When they arrive in Alaska, the women find themselves woefully unprepared for the frigid cold, the ever-present wildlife, and the scraggly men unwilling to respect or trust the motley crew of camouflage and lipstick-wearing ladies, as one newspaper described it. As one of the 4 30 and 40-something sisters, Tori, explained, quote, "Alaska is the last frontier. It is the wildest place," end quote. In this case, though, the point of the show seems to be just how out of place the very feminine women are on the frontier. Unlike the capable men in Ice Cold Gold, the women of Alaska Gold Diggers are portrayed as hopeless, unable to understand Alaska's frigid tundra, the hard tasks of gold mining, or the mining men that they employ. As with all these shows, the staging of this reality becomes more obvious once observers learn more about the areas. During a 2017 mining history conference outside of Fairbanks, for instance, I visited George Lounsby's small Clipper mine, which, because it is so much more developed than these women's property, was used in the Alaska Gold Diggers show as a stand-in for their mine, so that viewers could watch the women being confused by the mining process. Alaska Gold Diggers even features a long search for the women's Fairbanks claim. In the show, the women are on foot hiking through the forest. Yet the same property actually can, in reality, be easily accessed from the road. The tough search process instead gets staged on screen so that viewers can see extra footage of women uncomfortable and out of place in the Alaskan wilderness. The jungle setting also made a comeback in mid-2010s reality TV. The Discovery Channel's highly popular and very controversial Jungle Gold rose up the U.S. cable ratings during its 2 seasons. In this reality show, 2 brawny white men from Eagle Point, Utah, Scott Lomu and George Wright, explained they were once successful real estate moguls, but the housing crisis in 2008 put them deep into debt. To scrap their way out of debt, they leave their families behind and head to the Ashanti Belt, Ghana's most lucrative mining region. As the 2 would-be miners proclaim in episode 2, they're willing to risk everything. The 2 men lease a claim from Ghana's government, but they encounter challenges right away. Their truck gets stuck in the mud, they encounter illegal roadblocks, and there are armed Chinese men working on their claim. Wright and Lumu seek out a new claim, but there's flooding from the rainy season, which has made this new claim tough to excavate. So they call on some local friends of theirs to find a new claim. Scott George and the narrator constantly play up the harsh climate. Exoticizing Ghana's mining region is particularly treacherous. Narrator interjects that during the summer in Ghana it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity. Scott Lomu announces episode 1 that mining's such a dangerous business that, quote, "people die out here all the time," end quote. Viewers learn that people are always stealing each other's claims. George explains, quote, "It doesn't matter that we have all the licenses. You see any police out here? You see any judges out here? Out here it's the law of the jungle," end quote. The danger becomes real quickly. In episode 2, a farmer named Okweze claims the land they're mining on is actually his for his crops. He attacks Scott's and George's security guard, Ernest. George defends Ernest, jumping to the fight. The narrator announces George's masculine credentials. "He has no idea George was an experienced MMA fighter," the narrator says. Using his manly fighting skills, George quickly subdues Equese, but the narrator warns that if locals find out about this, things could, quote, get out of hand. Their biggest problem then would not be the jungle, they would have made their first real enemy. The show therefore portrays Ghana as a lawless, unforgiving landscape. Only quick thinking, risk taking, and masculine physicality can overcome this jungle. As the show's first season continues on, we learn about an American man who wasn't tough enough to make it. The show's heroes, Scott and George, had brought out their friend, a mechanic named Travis, to help them keep their old machinery working in episode 2. But Travis is gone by episode 4. Scott and George decide they can't maintain the $5,000 a month salary they're paying Travis, so they decide to send him home. Although the real failure here is probably the group's inability to find gold, the narrator proclaims that Travis simply couldn't cut it. Quote, Africa has claimed its first victim. George follows up, stating that, quote, Travis made it 30 days more or less out here, and that's longer than a lot of people, but the conditions out here, they'll break anyone after time, end quote. Show's incredible popularity meant that it gained lots of attention across the U.S., but that's where the crew ran into trouble. The show essentially became a victim of its own neo-colonialist trappings. Many Africans who lived in the U.S. accused the show of promoting neo-colonialist exploitation. Local rumors about the fight between George and Equese led members of Ghana's media to accuse George of murder. Villagers who knew more about what actually had happened soured on the show too. Equese had apparently been ready to harvest his cocoa crops when the jungle goat excavator tore them out. Equese was the brother-in-law of the landowner and clearly had not been apprised of the mining lease on the same land. Filmmakers' tricks also fed the narrative. Ghanaian law prohibits foreigners from mining on small plots of 25 acres or less, but the law allows foreigners to invest in these claims, paying for equipment and local labor. The company's owner can then split any gold profits with foreign investors. Wright and Lumu, of course, knew this law, which meant that they could not physically perform any mining. The result is that there are large sections of the show in which the two white heroes stand around while 6 black Ghanaians perform all of the mining labor. As a BuzzFeed article explained, quote, it was a disquieting visual reminder of Ghana's years as a British colony, end quote. Plus, the show's focus on the action meant that no time was devoted to explaining the complicated leasing process or Americans' actual role in mining. To prove their gold mining bona fides, sometimes Wright and Lomu will pretend to mine in the show, dipping their hands in the dirt and washing off rocks by hand. Having seen the two Americans mining on this small claim, though, the government began to investigate them for possible illegal mining. As a later article explained, quote, they became the face of Ghana's foreign mining community, which many blame for destroying the country's environment and harming its people, end quote. The country's Minerals Commission became upset at this depiction of Ghana as a lawless place where foreigners can engage in in illegal mining. So the director of the commission asked Ghana's National Security Agency to investigate the Raw TV team making the show. 6 months after premiering in the U.S., the first episodes of Jungle Gold also began showing in Africa, increasing the pressure on the British and American crew. An armed militia was supposedly pursuing them at that point. During the filming of season 2 of the show, George, Scott, and the entire Discovery Channel crew therefore end up evacuating by plane, fleeing the country without facing investigation. A month after the evacuation, the Ghanaian government also decided to crack down on illegal foreign mining. Thus, Ghana suffered the same fate, if not much worse, as the aforementioned coal places. Like Alaska and Greenland, it became labeled a raw new frontier for American adventurers. Ghana suffered from even more focus on its supposedly lawless nature, which made it seem even more worthy of mining by outsiders. As historian Tracy Bryn Voiles puts it, mining regions labeled as uncivilized often become wastelanded, made to look even more marginal and hence worthy of exploitation. Therefore, old colonial themes have turned up over a century later in neo-colonialist reality television. Television continues to celebrate brawny white men as they brave extreme climates and exotic locals. Viewers are convinced to accept these actions partly because the men these shows celebrate have upstanding masculine characteristics, particularly in terms of mental and physical strength, because these men have a real need to make quick money due to their own economic suffering, and because the locals don't seem to deserve these riches due to their simplicity or lawlessness. Hence, these mining shows perpetuate older ideas about race, gender, and the environment. They just repackage it for a modern audience that desires an appearance of authenticity. This highly mediated realism convinces many viewers to naturalize the conditions they see, including the need for their tough guy heroes to mine abroad. Viewers don't bother to look into the leasing process in each place or to understand how the othering of the locals is being used as a justification to mine. Instead, viewers see real men doing real work in a tough, risky environment, not feminized men sitting at a computer all day doing an unsatisfying desk job. The long-standing inequalities built into extraction therefore get repeated in reality television's neo-colonial narratives. Thanks very much for listening.